Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Gaurav Sharma and with me is Renuka, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses the first ever I2U2 virtual summit. India, Israel, the UAE and the USA to increase investments in the fields of water, energy, environment, health and space. Focus of inaugural I2U2 meet was on food security crisis and clean energy, says the joint statement. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa emails his resignation letter to the Parliament Speaker. New Delhi says that India will stand with the people of Sri Lanka to realize their aspirations for prosperity and progress through democratic means. Rishi Sunuk tops the first round of voting in UK's Prime Minister race. In India, free COVID booster doses to be administered to people between 18 and 59 years from Friday. A two-day meeting of the Bimstec expert group on cyber-security cooperation begins in New Delhi. India's ace shuttlers Saina Nehwal, PV Sindhu and HS Pranoy advance to the quarter-finals of the Singapore Open Badminton Tournament. And in cricket, England set a victory target of 247 runs before India in the second ODI match at Lord's in London. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that under the I2U2 framework, India, Israel, the UAE and the USA are working to increase investments in the fields of water, energy, environment, health and space. He said that the I2U2 has set a positive agenda from the very first summit, and by combining the skills of the nations, they can come together for the good of humanity. Addressing the first I2U2 summit in a virtual format on Thursday, the Prime Minister said that they will work towards ensuring food security and propelling development initiatives globally.
I2U2 ने एक सकारात्मक एजेंडा स्थापित कर लिया है. हमने कई क्षेत्रों में ज्वाइंट प्रोजेक्ट्स की पहचान की है और उनमें आगे बढ़ने का रोड मैप भी बनाया है. I2U2 फ्रेमवर्क के तहत हम जल, ऊर्जा, परिवहन, स्पेस, स्वास्थ्य और खाद्य सुरक्षा के 6 महत्वपूर्ण क्षेत्रों में ज्वाइंट इन्वेस्टमेंट बढ़ाने के लिए सहमत हुए हैं.
Mr. Modi added that joint projects in many areas have been identified and a roadmap has been made to move forward in them. He stressed that this cooperative framework is a good model for practicing cooperation in the face of increasing global uncertainties. Mr. Modi expressed confidence that with the I2U2, significant contribution will be made towards energy security, food security and economic growth globally.
In a joint statement, leaders of India, Israel, United Arab Emirates and the United States, I2U2, said that the inaugural I2U2 leaders meeting focused on the food security crisis and clean energy. The leaders said innovative ways were discussed to ensure longer-term, more diversified food production and food delivery systems that can better manage global food shocks. They said they intend to mobilize private sector capital and expertise to modernize infrastructure, advance low-carbon development pathways for industries, improve public health and access to vaccines, and advance physical connectivity between countries in the Middle East region. The I2U2 leaders highlighted initiatives on food security and clean energy in their joint statement. The UAE will invest $2 billion to develop a series of integrated food parks across India that will incorporate state-of-the-art climate-smart technologies to reduce food waste and spoilage, conserve fresh water and employ renewable energy sources. India will provide appropriate land for the project and will facilitate farmers' integration into the food parks. US and Israeli private sectors will be invited to lend their expertise and offer innovative solutions that contribute to the overall sustainability of the project. These investments will help maximize crop yields and help tackle food insecurity in South Asia and the Middle East. The I2U2 group will advance a hybrid renewable energy project in Gujarat consisting of 300 megawatts of wind and solar capacity, complemented supported by a battery energy storage system. The U.S. Trade and Development Agency funded a feasible study for the $330 million project. UAE-based companies are exploring opportunities to serve as critical knowledge and investment partners. Israel and the U.S. intend to work with the UAE and India to highlight private sector opportunities. Indian companies are keen to participate in this project and contribute to India's goal of achieving 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030. Anuja Kumar for World News, All India Radio.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on significance of the first I2U2 virtual summit. In conversation are Anil Wadhwa, former ambassador, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the first West Asia Quad Summit, which takes place with Prime Minister Narendra Modi participating in it virtually with three other world leaders, that is the leaders of US, Israel and UAE. And we also see that this is a unique forum which brings together the leaders from the Middle East, the US and India in a grouping together where economic partnership will be strengthened and food security issues among others are likely to be raised. Ambassador Wadhwa, when you see the summit which is going to take place today and we see that the main areas are strengthening the economic partnership in trade and investment in our regions and beyond, how significant is this summit?
I think this is a natural culmination of a meeting at the level of foreign ministers, which happened in the context of I2U2. And earlier, this grouping has already identified 6 mutually identified areas to work on, such as water, energy, transportation, space, health and food security. So at the summit, we'll take this forward. All in all, I think it's taking this relationship between the 4 countries to an altogether new level. There would be many more initiatives which will be forthcoming going forward as the countries move into specific areas of cooperation, and it will also involve then working with other countries in the region.
Ambassador Wadhwa, when we look at the West Asia Quad, we also see that unlike the Indo-Pacific Quad about which we have discussed a lot, and the one common factor which seems to bring together the Indo-Pacific Quad has been the challenge from China. Whereas if you look at the West Asia Quad, as UAE Foreign Minister also said, that there seem to be special bonds that distinguish relations between these countries, and that is what is bringing the West Asia Quad together, and that is also what explains the significance of this. The Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar has also noted that UAE, Israel and the United States are India's closest relationships, and these close ties make the 4 countries more willing to work together. Do you feel that the fact that we have these 4 countries which are willing to come together, work together, also kind of marks India's presence, not just now in the Indo-Pacific, but more in a global sense?
If you recall, conceptualized during the meeting of the foreign ministers in October 18 last year, then we've seen that India's bilateral strategic ties, which each of the other 3 countries are on upswing in the past few years. I think there are a number of common areas of mutual interest to strengthen the economic partnership in trade and investment in this region and also beyond. I agree with you that while there is no common strategic binding factor like China, which is important here, but at the same time, the trade and economic partnership in the region is the glue which binds these countries together. And the projects that they undertake can serve as a model for economic cooperation and offer opportunities for the businessmen, for their workers, etc. in the region. In fact, a country like Israel also sees this as a very significant development because of the presence of India, which it feels can help to enhance and expand the scope of the Abraham Accords, bringing in new countries. Israel feels that India has the ability to push others by saying this is in the interest of the world. And also, the Abraham Accords have been building on this potential of regional cooperation beyond the Middle East, especially on energy, technology, and economic issues. So, India's presence in this grouping becomes that much more important. Also, another issue that has come up since the last foreign ministers' meeting leading up to this summit is the fact that we now have a new challenge in the form of Ukraine. There's an energy and food crisis which has arisen as a result of this conflict. And countries like Israel are working with Greece, with Cyprus, etc. on natural gas pipeline projects. which will also have consequences in the context of what the I2U2 discusses. Because adding India in a new situation where Israel is emerging as a bridge between Europe and India, another big trading partner in the whole context, this will be quite a game changer.
Mr. Vadga, many analysts have pointed out that the West Asia Quad, it works because it brings together two key economies of the Middle East, that is Israel and the UAE. And then what you have in addition is a more assertive India and the United States, which is a global power. Do you feel that the significance of the West Asia Quad also lies in the fact that it has an economic strength to it, that the underlying strength of the grouping is the economic strength?
Yes, I think that what it brings is not just the economic strength, but also the innovative aspect and the technological aspect, which is important in the context of all these countries. As you know, India is emerging as a startup hub of the world. It is also moving pretty fast in terms of digital economy. And you have Israel and then you have UAE, both of whom are laying a lot of stress on cutting edge technologies and technologies for the future because they want to build their economies on the basis of these trends going forward. Again, I think the I2U2 offers, along with the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, a sustainable alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Countries in the region will definitely have an alternative to look forward to and to emulate going forward. Integration of Israel into the region can be helped with the presence of India. So there are many motivations behind the summit happening. Actually, I would call it a geopolitically important event where it's not just the economics of it, but also the political side of it, which will all come together.
Mr. Vadra, we've also seen that if we look at the four members of the grouping, the UAE is already one of India's top trading partners, just behind the US, China, and the European Union in terms of trade volume. Bilateral trade between the two countries was $59 billion last year. And if we look at the Israel-India partnership, we see that is also a very robust partnership where Israel is one of the top three suppliers of defense equipment to India. Today, 43% of Israel's arms exports are sold to India, and India's bilateral trade with Israel is currently at $4.14 billion, and it is expected to grow in the coming years. We know that with the US, India has a strategic partnership. It is a partnership which has been growing in strength in the last few years especially. Do you feel that the fact that India has such strong bilateral ties when it comes to the US, Israel and the UAE also helps in making the grouping a much more stronger forum?
The bilateral trade and investment between all these countries is on the upswing. With the UAE, India has also signed a bilateral FTA, which is expected to push this bilateral trade from the current $59 billion that you cited to about $100 billion in the next few years. With the United States, again, India's exports have been growing up. US is emerging as a major trading partner of India, the biggest trading partner, in fact. With Israel, it's not just the non-oil trade, but then going forward in the future, you could also have some amount of hydrocarbon trade through other countries. There is also an enormous amount of potential for defense cooperation between all these four countries. So I think the relationship is sound for all these countries to move forward in the economic sector, especially in terms of investments. And they have already stated their intention to mobilize private sector capital and expertise for helping in the modernization of their infrastructure, for low carbon development pathways for their industries, improvement of public health, and also for promoting the development of critical emerging and green technologies. What these are going to be and how the private sector is going to play a role is only going to be possible when the summit is place and when working groups are set up. And there are detailed discussions between the industries and business-to-business ties which go forward as a consequence of this particular summit. So it has enormous potential. And as I said in the beginning, I think we are only seeing the starting of a process which will certainly have a very good end in terms of the potential, if you look at it that way. It will also be an important supplement to what India has been doing by way of its efforts of free trade agreements, not only with the UAE, but also one with Israel, which is being negotiated. And coming together of the free trade agreements and these initiatives will certainly give a boost to bilateral trade and investment between all these countries.
Mr. Vadra, there's also been a lot of analysis and commentary that it also marks the U.S. return to being a leader in the global policy. If we look at President Trump, where we saw a retreat by the US on the world stage, President Biden's participation, which we saw earlier in the Indo-Pacific Quad, and today the summit which brings together the Middle East, the US and India. Do you also feel that what we are seeing with President Biden being so active in both the quads, that we are seeing a return of the US to leading the world or being an active participant in the world when it comes to global affairs, something which is different from what we encountered during the Trump presidency?
I think it's very important for the United States and its leadership through its initiatives like I2U2 and the Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity to offer countries a suitable alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Therefore, because of that and the presence of President Biden during this trip, which is also in any case a very interesting and very important trip because of the contacts which are happening with the Saudi Arabia, for instance, and the meeting which has taken place in Israel. And historically, he has flown from Israel into Saudi Arabia. And the discussions that will happen in terms of the strategic fallout of this future JCPOA and Iran, etc. in the region, all this will make very interesting reading and interesting results to follow as far as the United States is concerned. So the United States is actually banking on this particular summit to come out with something positive for the region, which will send a good signal. And as you said rightly, will indicate that the United States has not lost interest in this region of the Middle East, that besides its pivot to the Indo-Pacific, it is also still engaged with countries of the region. And it's important for the United States to remain engaged with both the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific region.
Mr. Vadva, we also see that this is the first time the members of the grouping will be meeting at the heads of state level. Until last year, the meetings were held on the foreign ministerial level, and it is likely that the summit will also discuss the war in Ukraine, the Iran nuclear war, and the rising inflation that we are seeing globally. And the Ukraine war is something which we have seen had its shadow on almost every summit that has happened in the world of late. How far do you think does the Ukraine crisis impact the summit and its members?
So certainly, I think the global food and energy crisis arising of the Ukraine conflict is going to figure prominently during this summit. The reason is quite simple, that food and energy crisis and prices have driven inflation around the world. Many of the US allies in the region are facing a crisis. We've seen South Asian countries such as Sri Lanka, for example, reeling under this crisis. And this is only going to grow in the future. And as long as the war drags on, we will see that this crisis will further deepen. While on the one hand, there is an attempt to ensure that grain supplies from Ukraine and from Russia restart again, and a compromise is found. But at the same time, the United States, along with its allies in the Middle East and Israel, along with India, which is emerging as an important player in the region, can contribute to amelioration of this crisis, becomes an important point to talk about.
With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on our Twitter handle at AIR News Alerts.
Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa emailed his resignation letter to the Parliament Speaker on Thursday. Sri Lankan Speaker's office said the Speaker has received Mr. Rajapaksa's resignation letter. The embattled Sri Lankan president had fled to the Maldives earlier this week and on Thursday took a Saudi Airlines plane to Singapore. The Singapore government issued a statement on Gotabaya Rajapaksa's landing at the Changi airport, stating that the Sri Lankan president was granted permission to enter the city-state on a private visit. According to an official declaration from Singapore's foreign ministry, Mr. Rajapaksa has not asked for asylum and neither has he been granted any asylum. Mr. Rajapaksa went into hiding after demonstrators stormed his home on 9th of July. Mr. Rajapaksa and his wife later fled to the Maldives. Before leaving Colombo, he had assured leaders that he would send in his resignation. Soon after, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe was appointed as Sri Lanka's interim president. Mr. Wickremesinghe directed the military to do whatever is necessary to restore order after protesters stormed his office. People have been staging nationwide protests demanding the resignation of both President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. Sri Lanka has been suffering from its worst economic crisis in decades.
The External Affairs Ministry of India has said that ensuring peace, prosperity and stability in all countries of the region is an important aspect of Neighbourhood First policy of the government as well as the vision for security and growth for all, SAGAR. Briefing the media in New Delhi on Thursday, the ministry spokesman Aurindam Bagchi said that this is clearly evident in the case of Sri Lanka in the multifaceted relationship that India has with the island nation.
Ensuring peace, stability and prosperity of all countries in the region is an important aspect of Neighbourhood First policy as well as our vision for security and growth for all, that is SAGAR, and the commitment we have demonstrated in helping the Sri Lankan people to address the challenges that are arising out of the current situation in that country. We will of course continue to stand with the people of Sri Lanka as they seek to realize their aspirations for prosperity and progress through democratic means and values as well as established institutions and constitutional framework.
The spokesman pointed out that India responded with urgency to assist the people of the neighbouring country in overcoming economic hardships. He stated that this year itself, India has expeditiously finalized and delivered assistance as well as support worth about $3.8 billion to Sri Lanka. He added that the Indian High Commission in Colombo has categorically denied having any role in facilitating President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's departure from Sri Lanka.
Former British Finance Minister Rishi Sunuk won the first round of voting to replace Boris Johnson as the United Kingdom's Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party. Sunuk secured 88 votes of Tory MPs ahead of Junior Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt on 67 and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss on 50. With this, there are 6 candidates remaining in the running to succeed Johnson. 2 candidates, Finance Minister Nadhim Zahawi and former Foreign Minister Jeremy Hunt, were knocked out from the race.
In India, the 75-day COVID vaccination Amrit Mahotsav will commence from Friday to provide free precaution dose to all the eligible population at government COVID vaccination centres. The special drive is aimed to increase the uptake of the precaution dose of the COVID vaccine among the eligible adult population of 18 years and above. The Union Health Ministry has said that this special COVID vaccination drive is a part of the celebration of the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Union Health Secretary Rajesh Bhushan on Thursday held a virtual meeting with the health secretaries of the states and the Union territories. He said that during the special vaccination camps, the vaccination has to be done mandatorily through CoWIN and vaccination certificate must be provided.
The Government of India has written to all states and union territories reiterating some of the key actions that are required to be taken by them in line with the Health Ministry's guidance issued on tackling of monkeypox. In the letter, Union Health Secretary Rajesh Bhushan said that continued spread of monkeypox disease globally calls for proactive strengthening and operationalization of public health actions for preparedness and response against the disease in India also.
A 2-day meeting of the Bimstec expert group on cybersecurity cooperation got underway in New Delhi on Thursday. The meeting is based on the agreement made during the meeting of the Bimstec National Security Chiefs held at Bangkok in March 2019 that the Bimstec expert group will formulate an action plan to deal with cybersecurity challenges in the Bimstec region. The in-person meeting is being chaired by the National Cybersecurity Coordinator Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant and will witness the participation of delegates from Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Myanmar, Nepal, Sri Lanka and Thailand. All the delegates are experts in cybersecurity. India, as the lead country for the security sector in the Bimstec Forum, has taken the initiative to organize this meeting on cybersecurity cooperation and develop a plan of action on cybersecurity.
2 Chinese defense attachés were removed by Fijian police from Pacific Islands for a meeting at which the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris was given a virtual address. The Guardian reported that the men were sitting in a session of the forum at which Ms. Harris announced the step-up of U.S. engagement in the region, believed to be in response to China's growing influence. These Chinese men were sitting with the media contingent, but one was identified as a Chinese embassy official by Elias Mwono, a Fijian journalist. Diplomatic sources later confirmed that the men were a defense attaché and a deputy defense attaché from China and part of the embassy in Fiji.
In cricket, chasing a victory target of 247 set by England, India was struggling at 48 for 4 in 14.3 overs in the second one-day international of the three-match series at Lord's in London when reports last came in. Put into bat first, the hosts were all out for 246 runs in 49 overs. Moeen Ali with 47 runs was the top scorer for England, while David Willey contributed with 41 runs. For India, spinner Yuzvendra Chahal claimed 4 wickets for only 47 runs.
In badminton, ace Indian shuttler PV Sindhu, Saina Nehwal and HS Pranoy advanced to the quarterfinals of the ongoing Singapore Open tournament on Thursday. Indian Olympic medalist PV Sindhu defeated Vietnam's Nguyen Thoi Linh in the second round of the women's single category by 19-21, 21-19, 21-18 and reached quarterfinals. Nehwal defeated China's Ping Jiao in the second round of the women's single category by 21-19, 11-21, 21-17. HS Pranoy also defeated Taiwan's Chao Tianchen by 21-14, 20-22, 18-21 and entered the quarterfinals. In the men's doubles category, Indian duo of Arjun MR and Dhruv Kapila won their second round match against the Malaysian duo of Goh Sefai and Noor Izzuddin by 18-21, 21-19, 21-18 and confirmed their slot in the quarterfinals.
In the ISSF Shooting World Cup, India topped the medals tally at Changwon in South Korea. India finished the tournament with 8 medals, including 3 golds, 4 silvers and 1 bronze, and were way ahead of the hosts Korea and Serbia in the medals tally. And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. First, we have a look at the press reports on China. SCMP writes a bipartisan bill introduced by the US lawmakers on Wednesday would make it official government policy that Tibetans have the right to self-determination and that the dispute over Tibet's status remains unresolved. The bill aims to press China to restart Tibet talks with the Dalai Lama.
The economist writes Xi Jinping has nurtured an ugly form of Chinese nationalism and it may prove hard to control. The assassination of Abe Shinzo, Japan's former Prime Minister, elicited a wave of joyous reactions online in China where he was widely reviled.
Now let's have a look at the press reports on Nepal. My Republica reports that the Election Commission has launched online registration for voters' roll with photos in the Kathmandu Valley.
Now let's have a look at the press reports from Pakistan. ANI reports that the head of research at Ismail Iqbal Securities, Fahad Rauf, said Pakistan's job market is suffering due to the economic downturn, while several sectors have reported layoffs.
Now let's have a look at the press reports from Balochistan. The Balochistan Post reports that 2 people, including a senior Pakistani army officer, were kidnapped by unidentified men on Tuesday night in the Balochistan region of Ziyarat.
Now let's have a look at the press reports from Bangladesh. Tripura Chief Minister Dr. Manik Saha has sent 750 kg of pineapples to Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, keeping the spirit of fruit diplomacy alive with the neighbouring country, reports Daily Star.
And before we end the news, a quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses the first ever I2U2 virtual summit. India, Israel, the UAE and the USA to increase investments in the fields of water, energy, environment, health and space. Focus of inaugural I2U2 meet was on food security crisis and clean energy, says the joint statement. Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa emails his resignation letter to the Parliament Speaker. New Delhi says that India will stand with the people of Sri Lanka to realize their aspirations for prosperity and progress through democratic means. Rishi Sunuk tops the first round of voting in UK's Prime Minister's race. In India, free COVID booster doses to be administered to people between 18 and 59 years from Friday. And in cricket, England set a victory target of 247 runs before India in the second ODI match at Lord's in London.
And now before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favourite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artist from Georgia.
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.